Hello everybody, welcome along to the Event Industry News Podcast. My name is James Dixon. As ever, I wish you a very good morning, afternoon or evening, whenever and wherever you join us from. And particularly apt my regular opening spiel with today's guest. Mr. Tim Woodring is the Chief Solutions Officer at Unbridled and joins us from Denver, Colorado. Today, Tim, thanks for joining the podcast.
Good day to you. It's nice to see you.
Fantastic, yeah, and we were just commenting, of course, this is the world we live in now, and everybody will be used to doing this, but, you know, the connection is touch wood, solid as a rock at the moment, and it was as if Tim and I were just sat opposite a desk in a conference room and having this conversation. It's a lovely, clear connection, and great to have you on the show today.
It's great to be here.
Tim, Unbridled, obviously, given the fact that you're over in Denver, Colorado, we can maybe be forgiven for not being familiar with Unbridled and what you do, but I think it's fair to say that you are a full-service event solutions agency. From looking at the website, it's quite clear that you offer real sort of concept to completion stuff, from event marketing, delivering the actual technical solutions, the copywriting side, the management of the event. Tell us a little bit just historically about the company and how Unbridled began.
Yeah, founded in 2001. We really started in event logistics, so event management, hotel sourcing, etc. And then 2002 acquired a travel agency, so we do group air booking and traditional travel solutions, ground transportation as well. And then just over the years, we've been adding things to the mix. So registration in 2004, we added creative services in 2007, production in 2008. And then since then, it's just kind of been this wild ride of, growth, mostly through referral. So we haven't necessarily had a strong marketing presence because we've just been delivering on the business. And then our clients love to tell others about us. And, one of the best things can happen is if a client leaves their current employer, goes somewhere else, because we keep the current client and get a new client. And so, we've been doing that over the years. We produce about 400 events a year. With a really real mix of services and industries, a lot of things in pharma space, other things in retail, events ranging from 50 to 10,000 people in Vegas, and so kind of across the board.
Yeah, sure. And I guess the irony is not lost on you that, as an agency that's tasked with creating marketing, communication, engaging experiences for its clients, having grown organically, by the sounds of things, without doing that yourself. But I guess, that shows A, how busy you are, and B, word of mouth is always the strongest form of
Absolutely. Yep. And just doing good business, forming great relationships. I mean, if we believe in the power of events, bringing people together, then a lot of it has to do with relationships, human connection, et cetera. And so when we form those relationships we really consider them partners and rather than just kind of this traditional client relationship, then we, that's powerful and that carries a lot.
It does. You're certainly on brand and on message, because the first thing that I saw on your website prior to us joining each other for today's podcast was that Unbridled was founded with one mission: connecting companies with their people through engaging experiences. I've underlined two key phrases in that first sentence: connecting companies and engaging experiences. How have those two elements presented themselves to you, certainly in the last 12 months, and the challenges that companies have faced, first of all, when trying to connect their people and their audiences? So, that our purpose is connecting companies with their people.
And the thing about that has kind of risen to the top is that, we feel there's a great need for that. So if you look at companies like Gallup, as an example, they're kind of a leader in the surveying space, especially in the U.S. markets, but also global markets. And they've put out their years an engagement survey, which is somewhere around 70% of employees are engaged in their work or connected with their company. And so, to me, that seems like a total tragedy when you think about how many people clock in and day out and don't necessarily feel a connection to their work or their company or their company's purpose or company's vision and mission in the world. And where we're not necessarily in the employee engagement space, we really do feel like we are in the connection space, and that is a noble thing to be doing in the world. Because, what type of change would we see if we had more people engaged in what they did and feel purpose-driven in their jobs with their companies? And we feel that events are actually probably the most catalytic force in bringing people together with their company, and and feeling a sense of connection to their leadership. For many employees or advisors, to a company, representatives of a company, users of a technology solution, oftentimes events are kind of the moment in which it may be one of the only times that you see the senior leaders of a company addressing you. You get the richness of nonverbal communication. You see their face, you see their mannerisms. You are making all these constant decisions in there, the attendees of events, of, hey, do I trust these people presenting to me? Do I feel that they have a vision that aligns with me, who I am, what I want in this world, what I want out of work? And, so these events really become catalysts for connection. And one of the things that's carried us, I think, in this pandemic is that that's less defined by what we do, say live events or in-person events, and it's more defined by what we're on a mission to accomplish, which is create these connections through these engaging experiences, which can be, and we're seeing that there's this total blurring of the lines between, the physical and the virtual with events. But one way or another, what are they unto? And I think that's what we're more interested in than, what they are.
Yeah, and it's I love the adaptation that has been forced upon us, and I make no hesitation in saying that, because it
absolutely.
was arguably at the adaptation. And I was talking to a company recently on the podcast who was saying that they deliver virtual events for their clients.
Yeah.
So they've turned all of their in-house team meetings into events, into digital virtual events. So rather than just them all hopping onto a Zoom and going through a boring agenda, that they've actually utilized what they do for their clients as a means of communicating with their own team and keeping them engaged, and
absolutely
and keeping their employees really sort of up to speed. One thing I'd like to ask you, and it's slightly off topic, I suppose, of the events industry, but when it comes to empowering employees, I'm curious to see what you think about the empowerment that maybe people have had, because they've seen globally this adoption of working from home. And how many companies have actually gone on record as saying, actually, we've seen no negative aspect to productivity. In some respects, productivity has gone up.
Has increased,
I'm wondering if that's going to empower maybe a younger generation of people to aspire to jobs that geographically they thought were beyond them. So where before you may think you've got to move to the big city to get the big job, actually now those doors are open to you because we live in this new age.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's a really interesting conversation. In addition to our mission of connecting companies with their people, we also have a vision for our own employees, and that's that they would feel this sense of freedom to run free, to pursue their passions. That's why we have the name Unbridled, right? It's kind of like, a horse that's not necessarily got a rein and is in a field to run free. And I think that, so I hope that there's components of the pandemic that catalyze really freeing environments and realities for employees. I also think it's kind of, I think that oftentimes we look at things in general when that doesn't always help us, and we probably should look at things more specifically. So, yes, there's this whole work from home thing. And I think if you think about the world globally right now, it's kind of like we're this mass petri dish in a science experiment that no one intended to do. So we didn't have goals or outcomes or objectives in mind. And so we're learning about what the ramifications of this experiment are. And that's not to make light of the pandemic and its costs and casualties, but more so what are the results? What is the change? And I think, we've massively increased the world's capabilities for digital things. We've got grandparents everywhere Zooming their children, and we tried for years to get people on video conference rather than just on the phone on, teleconference things, and we could never do it because culturally it wasn't there. But now we have that capability. And so, yeah, it'll be interesting. And I think, one thing I've seen is that tech companies often rule the stage in terms of media often. And so, hey, here's a work from anywhere policy, and they can accomplish that with their business. But some businesses, just by their nature, can't. Let's say you're in construction, you can't work remotely, or a lot of other industries that aren't necessarily under that same type of premise.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, like many people, I've had an awful lot of communication with family members over Zoom and over video conferencing, and it's something that as a family we'd never done before.
Right.
I'm part of quite a big, fat, extended family.
Yeah.
We absolutely love getting together for social events, weddings, anything, frankly.
Yeah.
We'll get together. But those times in between, we would never have thought, why don't we hop on Zoom and all get together and have a conversation? We've done that virtually every week for 12 months now.
Wow.
We've seen more of each other in 12 months than we have in the last 12 years.
Yeah.
And I suppose what that flags up when you then translate that up into events and into the business world is that if people have realized that they can really have meaningful engagement with the people who are close to them over stuff like this, then why can't they do that for business?
Exactly.
Why can't they do that for events?
Exactly.
And that's a great position that I think that we've been in, is that because we've done that in our personal lives, we've seen what this can then do. Potentially unlocks that possibility for business.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's something that I've spoken about a lot on here. And the adaptation towards those platforms. What was your own experiences of actually merging your own clients across to stuff like that? Was it a mixture of people being slow to adopt, being quick to adopt, taking some convincing, others less so? What was the mixture like over there?
Yeah. So, when we saw some of the writing on the wall, we had one client cancel really early. So probably like 3 weeks. And kind of at the start of it, it was really day by day, the changing in the news and et cetera. But they probably canceled 3 weeks before a lot of our other clients. And when that happened, we were kind of like, we said, oh, this could really have some domino effect on our industry. And if we were to take this really seriously, what are the decisions that we would make to prepare to continue to operate, under that same mission, in a world where we couldn't get together? So we pivoted hard, started kind of parallel pathing, building a virtual event platform, which we've done, and really scaling our capabilities. We had some people who had a lot of knowledge within the streaming space and virtual event space, and we had them cross-train a lot of our team members so that we grew our capabilities pretty rapidly. But our clients, they were in this, almost like a tailspin of navigating what to do. Do I cancel? Do I postpone? Do I convert to virtual? And, I really consider that kind of the first wave of virtual events, which is more defined by kind of survival. And really the conversation revolved around platforms. And so the first ones that converted and wanted to keep their date, they were kind of early adopters, and it was a scramble to figure out how to do this thing. Then we had some that had postponed or moved it, and they did it a little bit later on. They had a little bit of learnings going into that. And then, we started to see somewhere, Q3, Q4 of this prior year, that the conversation really changed then from, the platform, to just really, how do I produce a virtual event, into some people have done it. They had some events under their belt, and the conversation changed to, how do I actually engage my attendees in virtual events? Because, there's kind of this anonymous attendee that we get very little insight into their experience. We can see attendance or maybe page views, but how did they feel? There was less insight into that, and there was a lot of concern over making those more engaging, because we attended some and we realized, hey, I can tune out and I can check email, distraction is a click away.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It is only ever, an arm's length away.
Absolutely. Yep.
From complete distraction.
Yep.
One thing that I've just jotted down here is one word, and the word is webinar. The word webinar seems to have completely disappeared out of the event dictionary in the last 12 months.
Yeah.
What we knew as a webinar is now a virtual event.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Or, we talk tons about hybrid now. And if you think about hybrid, sports as an example, and it's kind of becoming ubiquitous in a sense, has been doing hybrid events for decades,
Of course it is.
Yeah. And now I went to a NFL game a couple of years ago. You go to like Dallas Cowboys Stadium and you attend the event, but you're watching the Jumbotron the whole time.
Well,
Because
look at the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl is the ultimate hybrid event.
Exactly.
Millions of dollars for 30 seconds of advertising space during the commercials.
Yep.
Entertainment there. It's being beamed into millions of homes globally, whilst there are anything from 75 to 100,000 people there in the actual arena itself. That, to me, when I think about it, that's been the ultimate sort of hybrid benchmark for years without even knowing it.
Yeah, and people still choose to attend that live, though they could get a maybe arguably better view if they were to be in their living room. And so there's still a magic, I think, to being with a group of people, that I'm not sure. We'll just have to see. One of the questions I was even driving in today thinking about this is, it's the difference in revolution and evolution. Mm-hmm. And if you think about, there's a great book on, it's kind of academic, and I'm like a closet academic, but it's by a guy named Thomas Kuhn, and the title is The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And he espouses that. That's such an academic word. He says that scientific revolutions don't necessarily happen in this kind of gradual uptick in change. They happen with a disruption, and then by the end, you can call it a revolution when you realize that by the end of this change, the way things operated before does not resemble the way they operated now.
Yeah.
So we've completely revolved, which is how you get revolution, right?
Yeah.
And then in contrast, an evolution would be there's a change, but there's still a resemblance of an origin. In other words, it's not completely different than before. And I think, Thomas Kuhn talks about this period in between that, in which people basically negotiate, people who are of like influencers in the space and leaders in it, they negotiate what this new normal looks like. And I think that our industry is in that period where we're trying to figure out, is this a revolution or an evolution? If it's an evolution, we can assume that we're still going to have massive in-person events, and hybrid will be a component of that. There'll be this blurring of sorts, but it'll still resemble before.
I think just to add to that I think one of the confusing aspects when you look at the term evolution is that evolution is so clearly associated with happening over a prolonged period of time.
Yeah.
We look at the evolution of man, et cetera, et cetera. What we've been forced to do is in a period of 12 months is adapt and change more in the last 12 months than we probably have done in the previous 10 years.
Absolutely.
Which is why it may be so difficult to distinguish and identify whether or not we've been part of a revolution or an evolution.
Yeah.
I think we've probably been part of an evolution that's just taken place over a far shorter period of time than we would usually associate with that word.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's I tend to agree with that. There was a catalyst that really rapidly changed things, but it may not result in a world that's absolutely different than the one prior, especially as we see, I think we're moving into this what I would call more of the third wave of virtual events, which is, the second wave was about engagement, first about platform. Well, the third's going to be about, hey, it's safe to gather, but do things look different? And do we continue to have the virtual events at the same scale? Basically, what do virtual events look like when they're not necessarily the only way that we can meet And there's a lot of conjecture about that, about what they'll be, how they'll work. But I don't necessarily think anyone has a crystal ball.
No, absolutely right. And in terms of what they'll look like and how they'll manifest themselves, again, just on a personal level, I don't think we'll see much change to how we've got to the stage that we are now after 12 months of how the top end of virtual events are delivered. I think you can always refine them. You can always make them a little bit better, from a production point of view. You can make them slicker. But in terms of the technology that we've got available to us at the moment, the top end of virtual events, I think broadly speaking, will stay the same. What will change is the end client's desire to either go back or stick with what they've got. And that will depend on their demographic, on their audience, where they're traveling from. A number of different factors where I already know of one major geographical academic conference that my brother participates in, usually it's biannually. And it should have taken place in Japan. They did it all via Teams, I think. And they actually have decided already, and this is sort of 7 or 8 months ago, that's it. We're sticking with this. Nobody's had to fly. Nobody's had to book hotels. Nobody's had to take time out of their academic diary within their own universities to attend. They can all go into their offices as normal, carry on with their work, and log in for a few hours every day. And I think that's what we've really tipped on. Is finding the right solution for the right purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we're talking with some of our clients, we're saying, listen, now's the time. We're in this window where you should really reconsider your event stack, is how I refer to it. The various sizes of events that you have within kind of a calendar year, and their purpose, their audience types, how they manifest the format, et cetera. Because, we're in a period of disruption. So there's kind of the capacity to ride the coattails of that and say, hey, we're really changing this event, our annual sales meeting, or we're changing our user conference, whatever it may be, and now's the time where you get to do that. And there's new options because of this digital capabilities. The platforms are getting much better. The functionality within them much better. And so I think really look at things from a fresh perspective. Maybe events as a mechanism for internal communication strategy, more didactic, me talking to masses, that may be done more appropriately in a virtual event. And because there isn't necessarily high premium or need for engagement. But then maybe with in-person events, we find that they're less about this, kind of delivery to the masses, less about a massive GS or a keynote speaker, and more about human connection, more about getting people together, forming relationships, connecting, the energy that comes with that. And we'll see, because I've wondered for years why we pay so much for keynotes to attend events or to show up things when I could go on YouTube and listen to a keynote that they did last week, or go to TED and listen to them speak.
And as you said, that's the question. If you want to do that, and if clicking on YouTube is what you would like to, then go ahead and do it. The people who do that are the ones who are less likely to want to then turn to the guy or the girl sat next to them and say, where do you work? Why are you here? What are you watching this? Why did you come to this particular seminar? Why did you want to attend this particular keynote? What are your interests? What are your business activities, etc.? That's why we go to these things. Like you
absolutely
said, the content itself can be accessed, can't it?
It can, yeah. So I think we'll see attendees that go to an event in person, watch the general session from their room rather than in a ballroom, and attend the networking event, right? Because if things are hybrid and if there's not a huge difference in being in a ballroom or not, and the experience for call them a remote attendee, but they could be in person, same as a virtual attendee that's in their, basement. And so I think we'll see a blurring of a lot of those things.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how it's always been, when we started to talk about hybrid events, live streaming, it was always, how do we take the live event and put it into a digital environment so people can access it?
Right.
And it's interesting now that nobody's really asking the question, how do we take this brilliant virtual event and put it into a live scenario.
Right.
And that, those sort of questions, why not throw that in there?
Yeah.
We've always looked at it going in the opposite direction of amplifying and extending the live event. Well, how do we amplify and extend the online event? TV have been doing that. Movies have been doing that for years.
Yeah, right.
The movies, the Harry Potter movies, huge movies. So what did they do? They built Harry Potter World at the studios in North London.
Experience it.
So you can now go and experience it. Look at what Disney have been doing. You watch the movie, you go to Disney World, you can experience it.
Yep.
We've now got virtual events that I think then go in the opposite direction and say, right, how do we amplify now into some sort of live experience for those who want it?
Right.
I think there's lots of opportunities there. To do it. How's your diary shaping up for the rest of this year with live stuff now starting to come back? And in the UK, as I'm sure you're aware, we now have what the government are calling their roadmap out of lockdown, where we have these key targets that we're hoping to hit in the next 3 months, whereby if all goes well at the end of June, we are out of any restrictions,
fully open.
Yeah, probably 40 million people vaccinated,
and
able to run events. How is it looking over in the States at the moment, and what sort of challenges are you facing?
Yeah, so we have an event next month that's an in-person event up in the mountains of Colorado and Aspen, and so that is lots of emphasis on safety. We're pushing standards, all of that stuff. Beyond that, a lot of our clients are we're seeing a massive demand in October, and so and October end booking into next year. In fact, many of our clients are challenged with space for next year because what's happened is a lot of hotels have said, hey, you can take your contract and propel it into next year or the year prior. And so a lot of companies have kind of these latent contracts that they're waiting to book space with. And now the crunch is happening in 2022, which I think is a good thing. And so, that's really where we're seeing some of the bookings come in. We've got about, I think, a quarter of the adult population vaccinated in the US, and are starting to get our stuff together as it relates to that kind of moving more quickly and becoming more accessible for those who want it. And so I think that we'll need to be in a space where for corporations and large event holders, I think we're going to need to get into a space in which, and I think this may be different for private companies and smaller events, but for bigger events, to where there's not the potential PR nightmare if I'm responsible for gathering a number of people. Because any corporation that would choose to do that right now could be subject to a total backlash from potentially getting picked up. X company or entity holds event and becomes a superseder, or and so I think corporations are until that dies down to where there's not this crucifixion that happens if you were to kind of move into a space of presenting some risk with gathering large people. I think until that dies down, it's going to be hard to be wanting to do something like that.
Is there a sense of in the industry over in the States of people looking around and thinking who's going to be brave enough to leap in the deep end first?
Yeah, there is that. And the states are starting the conversation there. Texas just went with a no mask. They kind of pulled the no mask thing, and we had some clients get on the phone that day with us and say, hey, we're holding an event in Texas. And then we saw other places that really ridiculed the state, saying, how could you even imagine doing this, putting millions of lives at risk? And so that's still happening, where there's these big differences in how people should comport themselves given the world today. And so, it'll be interesting. And, what's happening in Florida right now is spring break is hitting, and there's millions of people gathering, and they're trying to dissipate that. So we're still in this window where it's like I believe people are really ready to get out there. I talked with not a competitor, kind of another events production company in a different industry. that does a lot of EDM festivals, as an example.
Yeah.
And he said that they normally book out, they completely sell out the events in 2 hours. And they've had to postpone them 3 times because of the states and regulation. So what it shows me is that there's literally a high percentage of the population, vast majority potentially, that's ready to get together, especially young people, what we're seeing. Of course. And it's just not time yet.
No, I mean, and for us, I mean, it's really important to sort of stress the scale. Whenever I talk to our friends over in the USA on the podcast, in terms of geographical scale, we must always remember, we're based in the UK. We have people who listen in Europe and in Southeast Asia and over in the States. And we must always highlight the fact that we're dealing with a country that's the same size as Florida, as a state.
Right. Yep.
Do you know what I mean? So, you can't always draw comparisons and parallels, because ultimately, as an industry, if you're working across state, it's the same as us going to work in France or Germany.
It is,
or Spain.
absolutely.
There will be different state regulations. There will be different methodology that you've got to, work within. You'll have different restrictions, different unions, different people to deal with. And that, to me, for the events industry, certainly is, from looking from afar, is something that is a challenge that we don't have here, and puts you in a totally different position to us over here. How is that? Is there some sort of cross-state thinking going on? Are you able to talk to other companies or within the industry to find out how it is differing, coast to coast?
Some, I think that events are subject to the local, state, regional, even county guidelines here. And so it certainly affects our sourcing. For instance, we are going to film the content components of a really big virtual event that we do. That's this summer, the middle of the summer. We're going to film that in the weeks to come. And we're going to North Carolina, because the company has a large basis in California, but the restrictions in California really prohibit the use of venues and some of our ability. Now we're not gathering a lot of people, but in the state of in kind of the reality of uncertainty, we feel like we have a better environment to ensure that we can deliver the content that they want, the experience, the filming that they want, to really pull this together in a state with a little bit less restriction there.
And of course, that's not to say, and we must stress, it's not to say that, no doubt, that the appropriate safety measures and all the appropriate risk assessments are put in place. It's just about finding that location that fits what you're seeking to achieve, and that's no different to sourcing the right venue for your event.
Absolutely. Yep.
If people want to find out what you guys are up to, Tim, I know that you're quite, from what I've been told, quite active in normal times on the circuit of being a keynote speaker yourself.
Right.
Have you been able to participate in the other side of things and maintain, any involvement as a keynote speaker with any virtual events that are organised by other people? And what's your experience been like on the other side of the fence, if you will?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I have spoken at a number of events, mostly corporate events, and I speak on topics of the future of learning, the future of connection, and envisioning the future of events as well. And so it's been interesting, to not necessarily be in front of a crowd of people. And I think that adapting some of my content to be a lot more quick hitting with visuals and constantly pull people back into the content. And so, moving more quickly, more bite-sized type components, and shorter durations. So moving something that was 45 minutes in person to 20 to 25 with Q&A throughout. And so you kind of, you almost keep the attendee in the flow a lot more often, more interaction as a part of that. And so I think that has been really interesting. It's been fun. I've spoken for MPI. I spoke for an event for Visible, which is a large telecoms company. And but it's been fun too. I think a part of my experience as a speaker is just sitting there wondering, like, is anyone listening? I don't know. I hope so. But you could feel that when you're in person, and you can't necessarily feel that.
It's tough, isn't it? I think when somebody writes the history of the events industry in years to come,
Right.
the last 12 months, the chapter should be entitled "Death of the Mundane PowerPoint."
Yes.
Because that's the other thing that's, people's attention spans are short nowadays.
Right.
When we've all moved over to virtual events, the sessions are shorter.
Yeah.
You have to hit your content hard, because if you don't, somebody will just turn their camera off, mute their microphone, and just turn to their emails.
Absolutely.
They will literally just switch off because they're not under that sort of peer pressure, as you are in an audience where you are almost conditioned to keep your eyes focused on that mundane PowerPoint that's being delivered towards you.
Yep, absolutely. Well, even in a ballroom, we see it with phones, where people are in there, but not really there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember emceeing an event once, and I had to tell people, look, do you realise that when you go on your phones, that the screen lights up your face in a dark theatre?
Yes, totally.
So we can actually see that you're all on your phones and not paying attention.
Yeah.
Do us the courtesy of putting the phones away for a bit.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Can I ask one question before we
Sure.
finish today, Tim, about shaping the future of learning? I've got 2 teenage sons, and like most parents, not just in the UK but around the world, homeschooling has happened over the last 12 months in a manner that we didn't expect it to. But we've all again had to adapt to.
Right.
And one thing I've realised is that, depending on the learner, depending on the nature of what they are learning,
right,
that online content can be valuable. In other aspects, it's completely redundant. If you're doing something very hands-on, but particularly when it comes to university education, much is made in the UK of the cost of university education.
Absolutely, same.
And how it can be prohibitive to people if they're from a certain background where they're just not from a culture that promotes college or university education, and they don't have the finances to do that.
€30,000 a year.
Yeah. And I just wonder whether or not our ability to shift to delivering virtual events in the last year means that really there should be a meaningful conversation had about how we deliver a university level education in future, and maybe how we could offer a hybrid solution to allow people with the funds to have the full experience of the live,
right,
but for the people who may not want that or can't afford it, to also have access to it but via a virtual platform.
I'm really curious in what happens with this, James. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how learning plays out. I think that the university, and I am an academic. I have 2 bachelors and masters in fine art and design thinking, and I'm in my last year of coursework for a PhD. So I'm a believer in the university system and higher education. But I do think that it is cost prohibitive, and I think it's gotten out of hand for a large subset of the population. Not only that, take the cost, but I think that part of the challenge is proving value. And, now you can go on to Saylor.org today and take free classes, college level classes taught by college professors in any level, and get a certificate for that would essentially be the same education that you would get from a university for free.
Yeah.
And we're seeing the rise in certifications. We're seeing the rise in rapid development programs, especially as it relates to coding. And, what the World Economic Forum has said is that, employees in today's organizations will need 100+ days of learning going forward, because the amount of the duration of relevancy from something that you've learned has reduced to being less than 2 years. So if you take a 4-year education and realize that by the end of that what you've learned is largely irrelevant, then I think what we're going to have to see is that universities become a little bit more of people development centers, developing things like critical thinking, developing things like social skills and things of that nature, more of a liberal arts philosophy, some of the more humanistic sciences, rather than necessarily being a technical educator center. And if they can prove that, then I think that there's still value in some of those things. But if not, then I think there's a lot of really great alternatives, and that's gonna create some pressure on the way things have been for a long time.
Absolutely. Tim Woodring is the Chief Solutions Officer for Unbridled and has joined us today from Unbridled's base in Denver, Colorado. Tim, it's been a pleasure talking to you today.
It's so fun.
I dared not ask the question about what time you had to get up in order to join us.
Oh, it wasn't bad.
Given the time difference, but hopefully it's not been too crazy a start to your day joining us on the podcast.
Nope. Dropped my kids off and then popped into this room to chat with you.
Fantastic. It's been great talking to you, and as I said, it's always a pleasure to talk to somebody from our friends over in the States to find out what's happening over there. There are so many parallels and so many things that we share in common, but it's always good to find out as well what specific challenges you guys are facing over there that are different to us, and to get that little bit of insight. So it's been a pleasure. If anybody wants to find out a bit more about Unbridled or your own activities, Tim, tell us how they would get in touch with you.
Yeah, just go to unbridled.com. You can learn a lot more about us there. And if you want to get in touch with me, you can find me. You can just Google timwoodring.com, find me on LinkedIn, reach out. I'd love to connect with you on whatever it is, even if it's just, a conversation about mutual interests. And so thanks so much for the time, James, and really a pleasure to talk with you today. And it's fun to hear what's going on your side as well, across the pond.
Fantastic. Look forward to welcoming you on the podcast again in the future, Tim. If you are watching today's podcast on the eventindustrynews.com website, don't forget to head over to your favourite podcast platform on your mobile device, and you can access audio versions of all of the previous episodes of the Event Industry News podcast. Of course, you can always go in the other direction. If you are listening to us today, head over to eventindustrynews.com. You can check out the latest features, supplements and news that's happening not just in the events industry in the UK where we're based, but right across Europe and the rest of the world indeed, and our friends, as I've said, over in the USA. Tim, great to see you today. Thanks very much to all of our podcast followers for joining the podcast today. My name's James Dixon, and we'll see you on the next edition. Goodbye.